and let people in. We'll start the recording. We'll get started, and hopefully people will be able to sign in as we're going. So welcome everybody to Supporting Children with ADHD, what the research says and what it means for parenting. My name is Jennifer Ton. I am a social worker. I'm full-time faculty here at Canadore College in the social service worker program. I am also a therapist who works with individuals who've experienced trauma and the neurodiverse population. And so I will introduce my team. So Lisa.
Hi, my name is Elisa, and I am primarily a baby and child sleep consultant with a background in early childhood education. So in our programs, we have worked parenting into parenting support so that we can be here to support parents. And I have a growing interest in working with children with ADHD as well. So we hope to be adding that into our programs in the future.
Dakota.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dakota Hamilton. I graduated from the Mental Health and Addiction Worker program at Canadore College. Currently, I work in the community, mostly with clients who have ADHD, but a spectrum of diagnoses. I did the research as part of the research center with Canadore while I was in school. And then I requested to continue after I graduated, and so here I am. I'm still very much dedicated to the project, so thank you everybody for coming.
I'm so glad you're Umid.
Yes, hello everyone. And my name is Omid Ali Kharazmi. I'm a research specialist at Canadore College Research Centre. I'm working with this research team over the past 2 years in different capacities. And I hope you actually find this webinar useful and informative. Thank you for joining.
Thanks, Omid. Pam.
Hi, everyone. I'm Pam. I'm Elisa's other half. She's in Ottawa. I'm in North Bay. We have been running Restful Parenting for a very long time, a sleep and parenting coach with a background in early childhood education. And we've always had ADHD pop up. So like Elisa said, just being able to focus on this has been, is going to be great for us and our parenting support.
Beautiful. Thanks, Pam. Terra.
Hello, everyone. I'm Terra Nevrencan, and I work full-time at Nipissing University in Student Development and Services. So I support students who have ADHD and get them connected to the right supports and services, as well as I have a private practice in town. And so in that private practice, I get to work with youth as well as adults who have ADHD and have really enjoyed this opportunity to be part of this project, and happy to be able to share this information with all of you.
Beautiful. Thanks, Terra. Kaya.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kaya Collins. I am a social service worker student in the social service worker program at Canadore College, and I am also a student research assistant with the Research Centre at Canadore. So I've been supporting everyone on this project, and currently I am on my academic placement at the Children's Aid Society, and there I get to do a lot of work with children who are experiencing ADHD.
So thanks, Kai. So yeah, our team has been working together for about 2 years to be able to come to this point now. So we really appreciate you joining us, and so that we can share this information. So what we're going to talk about today is, first, we're going to set the stage of what ADHD is so that we have a common language. We'll look at ADHD through an executive functioning lens, and we'll talk a little bit more about what we mean by that. Then we'll look at like how we looked at the evidence and what the research was showing. We'll move into the 6 types of ADHD support and what that means for parents. We'll talk a little bit about working with the schools and other professionals, as well as an assessment guided support. So just a simple roadmap. We'll look a little bit into the system gaps and real life challenges, and then move into what our next steps are. So I'm just moving along here on the slides as well. Beautiful. Okay, so before we start to talk about strategies and support, what I think is really important is to understand what ADHD is. And so ADHD is a neurodevelopment condition, which means that the brain develops and works differently than neurotypical children. So this is really important in areas in regards to attention, emotions, and self-control. Now, these brain differences don't just show up in one place. Typically, they show up in multiple places. So for children, they might show up at home, at school, or in social situations. And this is why ADHD can really feel, for some families, exhausting and draining, and it's really consistent. And what we're going to start to talk about is this executive functioning lens perspective, which helps explain something that parents already know, that behavior approaches often don't work on their own. And that's because they're not addressing underlying skills that the child is still developing. So children aren't refusing, they're just learning, and they're still learning how to do what they're being asked to do. And so we're also going to talk about different presentations and what is also called subtypes of ADHD. We'll look at inattentive, hyperactive, impulsive, and that combined type. And why this matters is not every child with ADHD needs the same supports, and a one-size-fits-all strategy often increases frustration for families and children. So understanding your child's presentation helps tailor those strategies more effectively and reduce stress for the children as well as the caregivers. So we'll look at how do you start to match how your child's brain is working to what the strategies are and how to support them, hopefully making things feel more manageable and progress becoming more possible. Beautiful. So I'll move into the next slide. Understanding ADHD. And so with understanding ADHD is, as I've mentioned, is a difference in how the brain is developing and working, and it's not a behavioral problem. So our ADHD impacts children's attention, it impacts their energy level, emotions, and self-control. So why this is really important for you to know is that it's not caused by poor parenting, and it's not due to a lack of effort, and it's not a bad behavior or choice. ADHD is actually quite common in many children and families in Canada, and families can actually be quite surprised about how common ADHD is. And I will talk to children and parents when I'm working with them about how common it is and who they might know that has ADHD in the media. I just was talking to some swimmers of Michael Phelps having ADHD, and to just really kind of normalize that ADHD impacts all sorts of people. And knowing this can really reduce feelings of isolation as well as self-blame. Now in Canada, ADHD affects about 5 to 9% of children, and then we also see it kind of reducing into 3 to 5% of adults. And we're going to talk a little bit about the executive functions. And for many people, ADHD symptoms continue across the lifespans. Sometimes they shift a little bit for people and children. And so that's why supports need to change, but understanding still needs to remain, understanding remains important at every age. We'll move into how ADHD can show up in the daily life. And so when we talk about ADHD, it helps us move beyond the diagnostic label and focus on how it's actually showing up every day. So many children with ADHD struggle with attention and focus, but that's not the same all the time. And so what I look at is it's the challenge in regulating attention. And so children may be able to hyper focus on things that they're interested, and that it would be much more difficult for them to focus on tasks that feel like boring or repetitive if the tasks require sustained attention or effort, and often takes much more effort for children with ADHD. So things like homework, chores, listening to long instructions can be really challenging for these kiddos. Now, these challenges may look like avoidance, avoiding the homework, avoiding the chores, getting really distracted when they're trying to be able to do their chores or listen to instructions. Sometimes it can show up as frustration, but they are not a lack of caring or effort. Now, at the same time, many children with ADHD, when I talked about that hyperfixation or hyperfocus, deeply can focus on things that they enjoy. And so parents often notice like video games or creative projects, building or hands-on activities. Children can get lost in those activities, and that's quite normal. And so with that challenge in regulating attention, they may struggle to move their attention away from those activities. And again, frustration can show up if they're just immediately stopped. Now, organization and knowing where to start can also be really hard for children. This may come out in homework. They may feel overwhelmed and not know what to do first, and so they may delay starting. What can be really helpful for those children is to break tasks into small steps. So these challenges are linked to executive functioning, and Elisa will talk a little bit more about executive functioning, as well as the challenge in regulating attention. It does not relate to motivation or intelligence or a lack of effort. It becomes easier to respond with support rather than frustration when we really stay grounded in that. And we are able to focus on skill buildings versus correcting behaviors. So understanding daily ADHD challenges helps shift the question from why won't they to how can we help them. Okay. And so now I'm moving on to different ways that ADHD can present. And so the first way that I'm going to talk about is the hyperactive impulsive presentation for ADHD. Now, it can look really different from one child to another, and that's why it's really important for you to understand what your child's presentation is. For the hyperactivity impulsive presentation, it can often present as that they always are on the move. So they may have a hard time staying still or staying seated. And you might notice that when they're asked to stay seated, that they're fidgeting a lot, or there's some squirming, their legs are kicking. Often, these kiddos may be told that they're talking a lot, and might have a really hard time like sitting through meals. So getting up frequently through the meals, walking around, coming back, or getting up in class, walking around, coming back. Or even quiet activities like watching a movie can be quite challenging, or they like to talk through the movie. These children might also have some challenges acting before or thinking before they act. And sometimes you may see them grabbing toys or objects or interrupting conversations and blurting out answers, even when they know the rules. And that can be really challenging for these kiddos, is that they have the awareness of the rules and that they're acting before they're able to think about it. They also might struggle waiting or taking turns. It can be especially hard in games or group activities or situations that require a lot of patience. This can lead to frustration and can lead to emotional outbursts. And so these behaviors are not about being disrespectful or defiant. They are a sign that the child isn't they're not a sign that the child isn't listening properly or doesn't care. These are really just behavioral challenges with impulse control, difficulty self-regulation, and skills that fall under the executive functioning. And so this is really important for us to share as we get into the skill building aspects of it, is how to support these kiddos. So it's easier to shift from a correcting behavior to a skill building when we stay focused on that. What we can do when we're helping these children is, one, for us to pause, to be able to plan and practice regulation in real time. And what's important for you to know, that those are the times that can have the biggest impact, is when we're supporting kiddos in real time in kind of the real environment that they're in versus kind of structured programs. Move into the second subtype of ADHD, the inattentive presentation. And so with the inattentive presentation of ADHD, it's the least recognized. And even though it can really strongly affect the kiddo's daily life. So these kids may present as quiet, Sometimes you'll like see on their comments about daydreaming, or they kind of seem like they're in their own world. These kids are will or may not be as disruptive, which means that the struggles are easier to miss. In classroom or group settings, these kids may fly under the radar, and adults may assume that the kids are doing just fine because there's no they're not causing any problems. And parents may notice at home that kids are missing instructions or details. They also might notice that if your kid forgets what you just told them, and they really struggle to be able to follow that instruction, even if it's just given to them, and starting tasks, but has a hard time finishing them. These challenges are not about, again, effort or motivation. It's really a genuine struggle in the brain of sustaining attention, holding that information in their mind, and then organizing steps to complete the task. So many children with inattentive ADHD work much harder than it appears that they're working. And a lot of times the struggle is really quiet. And the struggle can be with schoolwork, routines, and responsibilities. And because these challenges are less visible, support often comes later on, or sometimes not at all for these children. But the impact can be quite significant on learning, as well as their confidence and relationships can be. So over time, children may internalize these struggles. They may feel frustrated, discouraged, that experience of like not feeling good enough. And this can happen even when they are good enough, they're capable, they're intelligent, but they've internalized these struggles. So understanding this presentation can help parents as well as educators to avoid expecting independence too early, also providing the right supports at the right time. So recognizing the inattentive ADHD allows families to advocate for supports that build skills, but also build the confidence and self-understanding for these children. It's not just about academic performance, it's about a good quality of life across the board. And so the quiet struggles still deserve support, even when they're easy to miss. Now, we'll move on to the combined presentation. And so the combined presentation is actually the most common type of ADHD. It can feel especially confusing for parents because the symptoms don't always look the same. So children with this presentation may have they have attention challenges, so struggling with focus, organization, and follow through, and the hyperactive impulsive behavior. So acting quickly, big emotions, difficulty stopping or waiting. And so these two sets of challenges can show up at the same time, or they can show up separately. And so what is really important to know is that with this presentation, symptoms can change throughout the day. And so the child may be coping well at one moment and then really struggling in the next moment. Now, how the symptoms show up can depend on the environment, whether they're at home, school, or the community. So it can look different based on the environment they're in. It can also look different based on the stress that they're under, what their emotional demands are, if they've had a poor sleep, or how interested they are in that activity. You may notice that the child seems fine in one setting and then gets very overwhelmed in another. So this is not the child choosing when to struggle. It reflects how ADHD affects the brain's regulation and how much is being asked of them. So because this presentation is more complex, supports really need to be flexible and individualized, really understanding how that presentation is showing up and where it's showing up and how it shows up differently. And a strategy working sometimes may not work other times, and that is completely normal. Changing strategies doesn't mean you're failing. It means that you're responding to your child's needs in the moment. So the goal is to move away from a rigid expectation towards a really responsive and child-centered support. And hopefully, as we present this webinar today, that you'll be able to listen to what feels right for you and your family and pull from this. All right. So understanding why presentation has mattered. And I've made suggestions to this as we've gone along. And so as we move through the presentation, you'll continue to hear many times that children with ADHD present differently. So this isn't just a clinical label, it's a practical tool for caregivers. When we understand the child's presentation, we start to make meaningful links between what we're seeing on the outside, so their behavior, and what's happening on the inside, how their brain is working. So let me give you an example. A child with an inattentive presentation may not be ignoring instructions. Their brain may be struggling to hold the information in their working memory and then filter out the distractions at the same time. Now, a child with a combined presentation may move back and forth between these challenges depending on the situation, that stress level and environment. And when adults are not understanding the presentation, the behavior can often be misinterpreted as like laziness, defiance, a lack of motivation, or poor listening. But when we do understand that presentation, our thinking shifts. And so instead of us asking, why is our child doing this? We start to ask, like, okay, what's actually happening in my child's brain now? What part of my child's brain is struggling right now? And how can I support with that? Now, this shift is really powerful. It moves us away from being behavior focused only towards a really child-centered approach, one that recognizes skill delays, the brain development, and the emotional capacity of the child. Now, with this understanding, caregivers often find it easier to respond with empathy instead of frustration, adjusting the expectations without lowering their standards, choosing strategies in what's happening right there to meet their child's needs, as well as advocating more effectively at schools and other systems, is really building your knowledge of what's happening in your child's brain so that you can advocate for your child and support the other individuals that are caring and supporting your kids. Now, understanding your child's ADHD presentation doesn't fix everything, but what it starts to do is give you a framework. And with this framework, supporting your child becomes clearer. It also becomes really more intentional and often feeling less overwhelming. You start to feel more confident yourself about, okay, I know what to do here. I know how to handle this. I know what's going on in their brains. When we understand how the child's brain's working, behavior becomes information, not a problem to correct. It's really helping us to understand what's happening, and then we can respond.
Thanks, Jen. So a major theme that has emerged across the literature and that Jen has mentioned was the executive function impairment in children and youth with ADHD. These impairments affect a wide range of skills, including planning, organization, time management, working memory, processing speed, task initiation, emotional regulation, which is a huge one, and self-awareness. These are not necessarily isolated challenges. They interact and often compound one another. Difficulties with planning and organization can affect things like completing assignments, managing materials, or following routines, something that seems simple, right? Challenges with working memory and task initiation often mean children know what to do, but they struggle to get started or hold those steps in their mind long enough to actually complete the tasks. Emotional regulation is also a key component of executive functioning. Children and youth, and sometimes adults with ADHD may experience heightened frustration. They get overwhelmed easily a lot of the times, or have some irritability and often have difficulty expressing or managing those emotions. It's hard to figure out what that trigger is sometimes. These emotional responses are not behavioral choices. They're closely tied to underlying executive functioning differences. So understanding these executive and emotional regulation challenges is critical to supporting both their skill development and emotional coping, not just the behaviors. Interventions that teach skills such as CBT, direct skill training, self-management, mindfulness, and occupational supports can be more durable than approaches that only suppress symptoms. Emotional regulation difficulties can escalate conflict in classrooms and at home with families, which is why relationship-based and system supports really, really matter. And then we could move on to the next slide. Executive function skills are like the brain's management system. So in children with ADHD, this system is still developing. That is a really important part to know, and often works inconsistently. This means that a child might want to do something, they understand the rules, and still struggle to follow through. Not because they don't care, but because the brain skills that they need and the impulse control to manage that task aren't fully online yet. Emotional regulation is closely connected to executive functioning. So when a child's brain becomes overwhelmed, emotions can take over quickly, making it hard for them to pause, reflect, or explain what's wrong. They don't know how to express themselves in those moments because they're so dysregulated that their thinking brain is offline. Understanding this can help caregivers shift their response. So instead of seeing emotional outbursts or shutdowns as behavior problems, we want to recognize them as signals that a child's nervous system is overloaded. With this understanding, support can move from the correcting behavior to teaching skills and providing regulation support, which aligns with what research shows is most effective for children with ADHD. When we support the executive function and emotional regulation, behavior will often improve as a result. So one of the most important things for parents to hear is that every child with ADHD is different. As Jen mentioned, they can present differently. It's not a one size fits all. ADHD doesn't come with one single profile. Instead, children show a unique mix of the executive function strengths and challenges. This means that some children may struggle a lot in one or two of the executive function areas that we went through, while doing relatively well in others. For example, one child may have a hard time getting started on homework, while another might struggle more with emotional regulation or time awareness. At the same time, many children with ADHD show real strengths. Parents often notice creativity, strong problem-solving skills, deep focus on interest, curiosity, energy, and persistence is one. These strengths are just as important as the challenges, and we want to focus on those strengths. They're often the foundation for growth, learning, and confidence, and can be their superpower. The key message here is that there is no single ADHD profile and no single right way to support a child with ADHD. So understanding your child's specific executive function profile makes it easier to adjust your expectations and choose strategies that can actually help. Supporting your child's skill development without comparison to other children. This is also a big one because as parents, we tend to not necessarily meaning to and not necessarily openly in front of them, but sometimes it's in our minds that we're comparing our children to other children. So we want to shift that. When you can move away from asking, why can't they do this? And moving more towards which skills are in need of support right now, it changes how those challenges can feel for you and for the whole family, for the child as well. Supporting ADHD is not about fixing the weaknesses, it's about understanding the whole child. So we talked about the executive functions and how to recognize them in your child, and now we get to talk about how you can help with understanding your child's executive function profile. We're not talking about labeling or diagnosing every behavior. What we're really encouraging parents to do is notice the patterns over time. rather than reacting to single moments. So instead of asking, why did this happen today? It can be more helpful to ask questions like, when does my child do best? Which situations are hardest for them? And many parents start to notice patterns around time of the day, mornings versus evenings, transitions, moving between activities or environment, stress or fatigue, hunger, when routines change or when energy is low. Coming home from childcare or school is usually a big time of overwhelming emotions, especially for neurodivergent children, because they've had to conform to the rules all day at school, which may not include many opportunities to get up and move around. So when they get home, they tend to unleash in their safe place. Recognizing this as a pattern can help you shift into what the need is. So is it a need for connection? Is it a need for movement before getting them to put away their lunch bags or do anything, have some independent time so that you can make dinner? When we notice the patterns and can give important clues about which executive function skills are being taxed in that moment. Talking with their teachers, caregivers, having those open conversations with them or other adults in your child's life can be very helpful as well. When you compare your observations to theirs, you may see patterns that are showing up in different settings, and that will help you to form, your strategies for at home. And it's really important to note that this isn't something that parents are expected to understand all at once. Over weeks and months, as you observe, reflect, and adjust, you'll build a clearer picture of how your child's brain works and what supports actually help them. This process shifts parenting from reacting to behavior toward responding with understanding and intention. This slide is really about shifting how we think about support from fixing behavior to building those skills instead. Remembering that children with ADHD often know what they're supposed to do, but their brain struggles with how to do it in the moment. So that's where these everyday supports come in. One of the most helpful strategies is breaking tasks into smaller, manageable steps, as Jen mentioned. For example, in a different context, having them clean up. That can be very overwhelming because all they see are things everywhere. So we might start with a simple, can you put the books away, please? And getting them to do one simple task. So we're helping them break it up into small bite-sized pieces that feel more manageable for them. And then, you can let them know that they can take a break before they move on to the next thing. As they get older, you can help them break down the overwhelming task. But instead of telling them what they can do or helping them in that way, you can give them more of the opportunity to look around and see what they'd like to start first with. Visual supports like checklists, pictures, timers, or routines can help take information out of the working memory and put it into the environment, giving them something tangible to look at and check off when they've completed the task. This can reduce stress and makes those expectations a lot clearer. So it's also important to practice skills when your child is calm. Executive function skills don't develop well in moments of overwhelm or frustration. They grow during calm, supported practice. If a child is dysregulated, anxious, or overwhelmed, their brain isn't ready for problem solving or compliance yet. Their brain is offline and they cannot understand what we're trying to get them to do. They can't think. So we really want to support that regulation first, get their brains back online, and then we're able to teach them in between those moments. So getting their brains back online can be through connection, calming strategies, or a pause. And this makes it much more likely that those expectations can be met afterwards. Adjusting your expectations as well. Doesn't mean lowering your standards or giving in. It just means that you're changing how you're supporting the task so that your child can be successful. The key shift here is support the skill before correcting the behavior. When we focus on skill building, we're helping children develop tools they can use now and carry with them into the future. Dakota.
Thank you, Elisa. So now we're going to be looking at the evidence. So before we talk about what actually helps children with ADHD, we want to briefly explain how we looked at the research. We used a careful and transparent approach to reviewing studies so that the information shared here is reliable, consistent, and based on evidence, not opinions or trends. This means we looked at research in a way that other researchers could repeat and come to similar conclusions, which helps ensure the findings are trustworthy. We also made a clear choice to focus only on children and youth. Adult ADHD supports were outside the scope of this review, so that recommendations could stay developmentally appropriate and relevant to the real experiences of families raising children today. By narrowing our focus, we were able to look more closely at what works best for children and youth, and what supports caregivers along the way. When we started this research, we were guided by a few key questions that matter directly to families raising children with ADHD. First, we wanted to understand what kinds of supports and programs currently exist for children and youth with ADHD, and just as importantly, where those supports fall short. Many parents are told different things by different professionals. This research helps explain why that happens by looking closely at the strengths and limitations of existing approaches. We also looked at how current supports could be improved so they better match the real needs of children and youth with ADHD, not just in theory, but in everyday life. Another important focus was age and development. What helps a young child with ADHD may not be the same as what helps a teenager, so we explored what makes supports effective across different stages of development. All of these questions came together to guide the main goal of the study: to build a clear, evidence-informed framework that helps identify, improve, and design ADHD supports that actually work for children and youth. To do this, we carefully reviewed existing research so we could look for patterns, common findings, and gaps, helping us move beyond individual opinions to what the evidence shows overall. So we're going to move now into what we learned from reviewing the research. In this section, we'll share key insights from the studies we looked at, including what has been shown to help children with ADHD and where families often run into challenges or gaps. This part is important because understanding ADHD support isn't just about knowing which strategies or programs exist. It's also about recognizing why those supports don't always work the same for every child or family. As we go through the results, we'll talk about what tends to work for children and youth with ADHD, what's often missing or hard to access, and how those gaps affect families in real life. This understanding helps explain why effective support needs to go beyond identifying interventions. It also needs to address the barriers that families face when trying to put those supports into practice. One of the reassuring things we saw in the research is that there is growing interest in understanding ADHD in more nuanced, child-centered ways. Instead of asking only, how do we reduce symptoms, the focus is shifting towards asking, how do we support children's development and daily functioning? So we identified 33 different interventions, which helps explain why families often hear many different recommendations. ADHD is complex, and different children need different supports. So a particularly important finding was that early intervention matters. When children are supported early, especially with skill building and environmental supports, challenges are often easier to manage and long-term outcomes improve. This doesn't mean medication is never helpful. It means research increasingly supports starting with interventions that build skills and support development, and then layering in other supports as needed. Understanding this helps parents feel more confident advocating for supports that focus on helping their child grow, not just controlling behavior. This slide speaks to something many parents already know intuitively. What works for one child with ADHD may not work for another, even within the same family. Research consistently shows that a one-size-fits-all approach doesn't work well for ADHD support. Children differ in how ADHD shows up, how intense it is, and how it affects daily life. One important shift highlighted in the research is paying attention to early progress and small changes, not just long-term outcomes. Early signs like smoother mornings, fewer meltdowns, or quicker recovery after frustration matter and tell us whether a strategy is a good fit. Supports are most effective when they are matched to how ADHD presents in a child. For example, a child with inattentive ADHD may need more help with organization, reminders, and task initiation. A child with hyperactive impulsive ADHD may need more movement breaks, impulse supports, and immediate feedback. A child with combined ADHD may need a mix of both with flexibility across settings. This also means that support intensity can change over time. A child may need more structure during stressful periods, like transitions, new school years, or big life changes, and less at other times. The key takeaway for parents is this: if something isn't working, it doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. It means the support may not be the right match yet. Effective ADHD support is a process of observation, adjustment, and collaboration, not a fixed formula. Different presentations require different types and different levels of support, and that flexibility is a strength, not a failure. For a long time, ADHD support focused mainly on managing visible symptoms, things like inattention, hyperactivity, or impulsive behavior. While managing symptoms can help in the short term, research now shows that it's not enough on its own. There has been a clear shift away from behavior-only approaches that don't address underlying skills, and medication being seen as the first or only option. Instead, research points toward a more balanced approach that focuses on building skills over time. This includes teaching executive function skills like organization, planning, and emotional regulation, providing supports that help children practice these skills in real-life situations, and using individualized, child-centered approaches rather than expecting children to fit one model. It's important to be very clear here. This is not an anti-medication message. Medication remains an evidence-based option for many children and many families. What's changing is the order and emphasis. The goal is to first build skills, routines, and supports, and then decide together what additional tools, including medication, might be helpful. This move from a medication-first model to an intervention-first approach helps reduce reliance on medication alone and supports children in developing skills they can use long term. For parents, the key takeaway is this: supporting ADHD is not about fixing a child. It's about giving them tools, scaffolding, and understanding so they can succeed across settings and over time. When we focus on skills first, we're investing in a child's independence, confidence, and long-term success, not just their short-term behavior change.
Thanks, Dakota. In the next set of slides, we're going to focus on what we believe is most relevant and useful for parents and caregivers. This isn't meant to simplify or reduce the research, but it's meant to translate it in a way that connects to the real day-to-day experiences of families. Parents and caregivers know their children best. The goal here is not to tell families what to do, but to share patterns we saw across the research that may help make sense of what being at home or at school. As we move through these slides, we encourage parents and caregivers to listen through the lens of your own child. Not everything will apply to every family, and that's to be expected. If a point resonates, it can be a helpful starting place for reflection, conversation, or advocacy. If it doesn't fit, it doesn't mean it's wrong. It simply means your child's needs may look different. Our intention is to support understanding, reduce self-blame, and offer evidence-informed insights that families can use in ways that work for them. So to help understand the findings, we grouped what we learned from the research into 4 main areas. 1 being the types of supports that exist or interventions. 2, what works well. 3 being where the gaps remain. And 4 being program recommendations or what can be improved. So we'll focus on summarizing the information that is most relevant to everyday life for families. The goal is to help parents make sense of the research and see how it connects to what you're already noticing at home, at school, and in your child's everyday daily experiences. This approach allows us to move from what the research shows to how it can be used to better support children and families in real practical ways. So as Dakota had said, research identified 33 different interventions, which helps explain why families often receive many different recommendations from professionals. These interventions were grouped into 6 broad categories to help understand how supports fit together. Many children benefit most when supports are combined. So for example, skill building at home, accommodations at school, and family-based supports, rather than relying on just one approach, is the most beneficial. So this framework helps families see that ADHD support is not about finding the solution, but finding the right combination of supports for your child. Effective ADHD support is layered, individualized, and centered on the child. And as we've stated already a couple of times, not a one-size-fits-all approach. So research shows that responding only when behavior becomes a problem is rarely enough for children with ADHD. Instead, children progress when adults use a mix of planning ahead and supporting in the moment. For example, setting routines, preparing for transitions, and responding calmly when challenges come up really helps. Motivation is also important. Children are more likely to change and grow when they feel understood and supported, rather than being corrected or punished. Tailoring support means recognizing that ADHD looks different in every child. What works for one child or family may not work for another, and that's okay as well. It's totally natural. Finally, the research is clear that focusing only on reducing symptoms doesn't lead to meaningful changes on its own. Children need support that helps them build skills over time, especially when started early and adjusted to their individual needs. So when we talk about skill building, we're talking about helping children learn skills they don't yet have, not correcting them for struggling. Skill building can look different for every child. There isn't one right program or one perfect strategy that works for everyone. One part of skill building is therapy or coaching. This gives children a safe place to practice handling emotions, behavior, and everyday challenge, like frustration, waiting, staying on task, turn taking. And another important piece is teaching the skills step by step. So many children with ADHD need skills broken down into small parts. So for example, it starts with how do you actually start a task? How do you stay organized? And then how to finish that task before moving on to a new task. So seeing skills modeled can be very helpful. So some children learn best by watching someone show them what a skill looks like rather than being told what to do. And some programs work with children and the caregivers together. This helps caregivers learn the same strategy their children are using, so supports stay consistent at home and at school. Skill building can also happen through school or play-based activities, and these structured activities help children practice attention, social skills, and emotional awareness in ways that feel more natural and less stressful. Some children benefit from occupational supports, especially if routines, transitions, or sensory overload are hard for them. And as we said before, motivation and goals matter. So when children notice progress, even small wins, it builds confidence and helps them to keep trying. The key message as caregivers is that skill building is about teaching skills over time, not expecting children to already know them. So support helps children grow towards independence one step at a time. So skill building interventions are one of the most common and effective types of support identified in the research. These approaches recognize that many ADHD related challenges come from delays in skill development, not a lack of motivation or effort. For example, a child may know they need to start homework, planning, organizing, or emotional regulation. And these skills are the ones that need to be taught and practiced. So skill building supports can happen in many settings, in therapy playroom, at school, at home, or structured programs. Some focus directly on the child, while others involve caregivers, and so that those strategies are consistent across different environments. Again, the goal is not perfection. It's helping children build these skills over time so daily life becomes more manageable for them and their families.
Thanks, Terra. So now we're going to jump into how school supports can help children with ADHD. So school, as we know, can be one of the most challenging environments for children with ADHD because it requires that sustained attention, organization, emotional regulation, and impulse control. So school-based supports are designed to help children practice these skills in real time rather than expecting them to already have them. Tools like the daily report cards that you can see here are about communication and consistency between home and school, and not about punishment, discipline, behavior. Training programs and positive behavior approaches help teachers understand ADHD as brain-based differences, again, not as that discipline issue. When parents and teachers are on the same page, children receive clearer messages and more predictable support. And when school supports focus on skills and relationships, children are more likely to feel successful. Parents are less likely to feel like they're carrying everything on their own. All in all, when schools and families are working together, children with ADHD are better supported across every part of their day. So some of the things that can help teachers support our children, supports like PBIS, the positive behavior support, can help schools create predictable environments where children know what to expect and how to succeed. When teachers know a child's strengths, their past successes, specific needs, they can respond more proactively and with a lot less frustration. For parents, showing what works, or sharing what works, what doesn't work, helps create that continuity and can reduce the emotional burden on families. Many challenges for children with ADHD happen during transitions, moving between activities, classrooms, or rising up to expectations. Planning for those transitions is important, as changes can overload that executive functioning and emotional regulation. So family-based supports focus on strengthening those relationships, not just managing behavior. Children with ADHD do best when they feel safe and understood, supported at home and at school, and are connected to the adults in their lives. What these supports focus on. ADHD affects the whole family, not just the child, making family-based support so important. These approaches recognize that behaviors often get connected to how safe, understood, and supported a child feels in their relationships. Programs like CARE, Circle of Security, TBRI help caregivers better understand what their child needs emotionally and how to respond in ways that strengthen connection. When families and schools communicate and collaborate, children receive clear messages and more consistent response, which reduces stress for everyone. And when relationships are supported, children are better able to learn and grow. Why this matters for parents? That strong relationships help children regulate emotions and behaviors. And as we know, when caregivers feel supported, children benefit. Connection really does. It creates that foundation for learning, skill building, and growth. Supporting the parent-child relationship is not extra. It's a core part of effective ADHD support. So what effective family involvement can look like? So family involvement means more than being informed, it means being included. Research shows that children with ADHD benefit most when parents and caregivers are active partners in planning and decision making. This doesn't mean that families need to do more work. It just means that the support should work with families, not around them. Of course, always keeping in mind how important that flexibility is, because as we've learned, what works for one family, for one child, may not work for another. And supports need to fit that real life schedules, stressors, their own strengths. Regular check ins help everyone stay aligned and prevent small challenges from becoming bigger ones. And when emotional needs are part of the picture, families often need more support. And the research highlights the importance of recognizing and responding to this. When families are supported, children are supported. So caregiver education and training. Caregiver education doesn't mean parents are doing something wrong. It means ADHD really is so complex, and understanding it makes a real difference. When caregivers learn how ADHD shows up for their child, everyday challenges start to make more sense. This understanding helps parents move from reacting to behavior towards supporting skill development. Behavioral training builds problem solving skills. So when one strategy doesn't work, parents feel parents feel more confident trying another. Instead of feeling stuck or discouraged, ultimately, caregiver education supports the whole family by reducing stress, improving communication, and strengthening connection. Using your voice in school meetings. This can be a really stressful one for a lot of families. Many parents come into school meetings feeling really nervous, overwhelmed, unsure what to say. But one of the most important things to remember is that the parent is the expert on their child. You are the expert on your child. You know your child's strengths, struggles, patterns in ways that no report or assessment can. Your observations matter, and they add essential context to what schools see in the classroom. Starting meetings by sharing your child's strengths helps sets a positive tone. It reminds everybody at the table that your child is more than just their challenges, and that those strengths can be built on at school. This is really important, especially that mindset going into school, into a school meeting. We're on the same team. We're really trying to take down our defenses. Oftentimes, some of those report cards, maybe we're getting not so positive reports all the time, so we can kind of feel defensive. So really going in, reminding yourself and setting that mindset that we are a team, we are trying to do the best. I'm going to come in with my expertise, they're going to come in with their expertise, and we're going to be able to connect together. Sharing what works at home is incredibly invaluable. Strategies that help with routines, transitions, emotional regulation can often be adapted into that classroom as well. It's also okay to name what feels hardest and what you've already tried. This helps prevent repeating strategies that haven't worked, moves the conversation forward more efficiently. Finally, one of the big things that you do want to be mindful of is asking how progress is going to be checked up on as we keep going. So it's not necessarily a set and forget. We want to have regular follow-up meetings and collaboration between that family and school to revisit those plans together. Your voice helps create community between home and school, and that consistency is especially important for children with ADHD. Advocacy doesn't have to be confrontational. It can be collaborative, informed, and grounded in knowing your child well.
Thank you, Pam. So now we're going to talk about some technology-based supports for ADHD. And so technology-based supports often sound promising, and many parents hear about them through media, clinics, or online sources. So the research shows that these tools can be helpful for some children, but they are not standalone solutions and they are not necessary for every family. So neurofeedback, for example, is one of the technology-based interventions, and it uses sensors to show children information about their brain activity and is geared to help kids practice focus and self-control with an overall goal of helping them become more aware of their attention and their regulation. So this type of support is a lot like how children learn other skills with, repeated practice of the same skill until they are mastery at it, but it requires time, consistency, and professional oversight and works best when it's combined with other supports. So another technology-based support is brain stimulation. And so you may hear terms like RTMS, which means magnetic stimulation, and TDCS, which means low-level electrical current stimulation. So when you hear these terms, they're used to refer to a type of non-invasive therapy that is aimed at influencing the parts of the brain that are involved with attention and regulation, those executive functions. And so brain stimulation approaches are still developing, and the evidence for children is still emerging. So that's why they are not typically recommended as first steps, and they should always involve careful medical guidance. So for parents, the most important message is that technology is one possible tool, but it is not a replacement for relationships, skill building, or everyday support. And so now we're going to talk about some medical supports, including medication. And so medication is often the first thing that parents hear about when their child is diagnosed with ADHD. And that can bring up a lot of questions or really strong feelings about, having their child go on medication. So the research shows that medication can be effective, but it works best when it's part of a larger support plan. So behavioral and skill building supports help children develop abilities that they're going to need long term, such as that emotional regulation, organization skills, and independence. So when medication is used alongside these other supports, families often see more meaningful and lasting improvements, and that is because they're building skills while they're working on reducing those visible symptoms. So they're working on both things at the same time. But it's important to remember that there is no right choice for every family. And the most important thing is that decisions are individualized, informed, and made together with trusted professionals. And so, what parents really need to know about medication is that it does not address challenges with organization, emotional regulation, and problem solving, which are a lot of the big problems that children with ADHD are facing. And so long-term success is strongest when medication, if it is used, is combined with skill-building supports, school-based strategies, and family and relationship-based support. So medication can be helpful for some children, but lasting progress and success comes from building skills and supporting development, not only managing those visible symptoms.
All right, thanks, Kaya. So when we talk about assessment-guided support, the goal is to make things clearer, not more complicated. The first step is to clarify what the goal is. And so you might ask yourself, what do we want our daily life to look like for our child, for our families? That might include smoother mornings, less homework stress, fewer emotional meltdowns, better sleep or routines. Now, assessments is not just about the label. It helps us answer specific and practical questions, such as where is your child struggling the most? What skills are still developing, where they are in their development, and what supports will actually help. The next step is to match that level of support with your child. So some children need like a really light short-term support, and others are going to need more consistent and more intensive supports and help. So needing more support is not failure. It's just about fit and how the brain is developing, and progress should be continued to be checked on regularly. What's working, what's not working, and what feels easy and what feels harder over time. And things can feel harder over time as well. Supports should be addressing as needed. So as children grow, as the demands change, supports need to change as well. And so we're always reassessing what supports need to be put in place. And so this is a roadmap and not a straight line. Adjusting supports doesn't mean anything is going wrong. It means that you're really attuned and responding to your child's needs. And so here I think is a really important slide to be able to talk about and to really understand why supports ADHD supports don't always work as well as they should. And so many parents can come into ADHD supports feeling really frustrated. They might feel discouraged. They might feel really worn down after years of really trying to support their child, especially if things have shifted into more of a heavier direction. And they can really have come into talk with ADHD supports after trying multiple strategies without seeing like sustained lasting changes. So what research is showing is this frustration is often linked to a system level gap, and it's not a lack of the effort of the family. And it's not because the parents or child aren't trying hard enough. ADHD is complex, as we've talked about. When identifying training or individualized plans are missed, even evidence-based interventions can fall short. So naming these gaps matter because it shifts the focus away from blame and towards improving how support is being delivered. Now, this understanding can help you or as parents feel more confident to ask questions. Remember, and we continue to say, it's like you are the expert of your child. Request reassessment when needed. It's okay to say, okay, can we take a look at this again? Actually, it's vital to do that. Advocate for supports that better match your child's needs. And what the research shows is families often experience running into challenges not because they did something wrong, but because of the gaps in the system. And so common gaps include ADHD not always being identified accurately or early, and some children are misunderstood or misdiagnosed. Others are diagnosed later than they should be. Not all professionals receive ADHD training. Teachers and clinicians may lack up-to-date information, specialized ADHD knowledge, and research doesn't always translate into real life practice. And so that's what we're hoping to be able to start to do today. What studies showed works and isn't always what families actually can access. Supports aren't always individualized. Sometimes it is programs that are developed and they go out and they're supporting children in that same format, but not looking at the child. They're just looking kind of at the program, a structured program. Children may receive generic strategies, and these may not match how the ADHD presentation is showing up for them. Assessment and follow-up can be limited. So without regular review, supports may stay the same over time. And so even as children are growing, they're learning these skills, they're developing, and their needs are changing, the supports may not be matching or with them. So when supports aren't working, a parent checklist, it doesn't actually mean that anything is going wrong. So this checklist is meant to help parents pause, reflect, and ask the right questions, not to add any pressure. So the questions may be, is the support matching my child's presentation of ADHD? Does it match if my child is presenting as inattentive, that hyperactivity are combined? And you can ask these questions like, help me understand how the strategy is matching the inattentive presentation. A strategy that helps one child may not help another, and poor fit can make even good strategies ineffective. So then another good question is, are we building skills, not just correcting behavior? Behavior is often a sign of a skill that is still not developed. And so we can ask, okay, what's happening here? What skill is missing? How are we doing that for the child? Okay, you're seeing this behavior come up. It's telling us something. How do we support the child in building a skill to be able to help them through that? Or are we responding to only when things are going wrong? And unfortunately, that happens sometimes. Is there a one coordinated plan across home and schools? So children do best when the expectation and supports are aligned. Inconsistent approaches can increase confusion and stress, and they'll tell you that. Now, a coordinated approach helps reduce mixed messages for children and that everybody's on the same team. And so having those really good communication tools, as well as meetings with the schools or other professionals, can be vital for the children, and making sure that you understand what's happening in regards to skill building, so then you can also do it at home. And if you're doing skill building at home, that they can do it at school as well. Do we need to adjust the intensity or settings or strategies? Supports might need to change as demands change for your children. Your child grows and develops, or in highly stressful times, we may need to shift how supports are happening for that child. Adjusting supports is a sign of being responsive, not a sign of failure. So why ADHD supports can feel inconsistent, and we're talking here still about those gaps that families are encountering, is many of the challenges are based on that system. What happens in practice, supports are not always consistent. Even the use of evidence-based strategies might look different from one classroom to another classroom, and that's also where it can be helpful having teachers talk to each other from one provider to another. Research doesn't always reach schools, so what's helpful in studies or studies showing it's helpful isn't always reflected in the day-to-day practice. And teachers and school staff may not be receiving enough ADHD specific training, which then can lead to misunderstandings about behaviors or what's being seen in the classroom, or even misunderstandings about ADHD, incorrect assumptions about learning. Many professionals are also still learning about ADHD, and so there's a knowledge gap across the system, and so that can impact the quality of supports as well as how services work together. So here, I think it's really important to say, you, in our next slide, you don't have to carry it alone. I really hope you've heard the continued pattern of encouraging collaboration with schools, that teachers aren't alone, that they have resource teachers or individuals who are able to do assessments, administration, clinicians, with other caregivers, be able to work together as a team. And advocacy is so much easier when you feel informed and supported. So you deserve a team, not just responsibility. We actually have a few focus groups coming up. We have a focus group next week for practitioners that are working in the field and supporting children and youth with ADHD. We have a focus group coming for parents and caregivers, as well as for the youth themselves, 16 to 25. And so we've scoped the literature, we've looked at the information, and we truly believe that your voice matters too. And so that's where we thought it was really important that after these webinars, to be able to have focus groups to hear from you, and to be able to provide us valuable feedback from your experience. And as we said, that as parents, you are the expert of your children. So we do value that and hope you'll participate. So I'd like to thank you for participating, for coming, for being interested in what we have to share. And I'm open to any questions. Please know we are going to be, it's recorded, and we'll be sending out a link, because I know that we've provided a lot of information. I've also created a handout because I understand there's been so much information. So know you will have access to the link, which is our presentation, as well as the handout we'll send out as well.